Hey everyone, it's Zach Wright from IMEO Company, improving management, employees, and organizations where we focus on people, process, and purpose. And this is what we're talking about today, OKRs, objectives and key results. Now, if you're not familiar with OKRs or objectives and key results, stay around because after this presentation, you'll be able to walk away with a clearer understanding of a framework that could really improve your focus and alignment in your organization. So let's go ahead and dive into it. We're going to be talking about what are OKRs, how do they work, why they are important, and then we're going to do a full recap of everything that we learned. So starting off here, what are OKRs? If you're not familiar with this, they are a goal-setting framework used by large companies like Apple, Intel, Google, even Bono, the rock star, uses OKRs for his charity. So let's break it down into sections here. The O equals objectives. So that's simply the what. What is it that we're trying to achieve as a company, as a team, as an individual? That's the what. Then key results. That's going to be the how. How do we get to the objective, or how do we achieve what we are trying to achieve? Now, an effective key result is going to be specific and time bound, meaning that each time that you have a key result, you want to be specific with what it is that you're trying to accomplish here. And you also want to tie a due date to it. Now, what we do at IMEO is we recommend quarterly OKRs, meaning that we start at the beginning of the quarter by defining the OKRs that we're going to try to achieve. And then at the end of the quarter, depending on first, second, third, fourth quarter, that's going to be your end goal. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't achieve it before that time frame comes along, but it gives you that constraint. So you know that what you're working on has to be completed. And if you're familiar with time setting or goal setting, whenever you attach that piece of the puzzle to it, you somehow psychologically understand that you have to move the needle forward by this time. Now, the last part on this section is you got to make sure that they're measurable. Now, with OKRs, they can be binary or they can be actual quantitative. So they can have numbers involved. And Marissa Mayer has gone so far to say that it's not really an objective and key result if it's not quantitative. So the best situation here is to throw in those numbers to make sure that you're able to track it. Now, we're going to see one in action right here. This is actually an example pulled directly from the book Measure What Matters by John Doerr. And if you want to learn even more about OKRs after this presentation, I recommend buying Measure What Matters by John Doerr. He breaks it down in such a simplistic way of learning objectives and key results. So this is an example. The objective, remember, is the what. So what are we trying to accomplish? We want to win the Indy 500. Okay. Now, it's a best practice that whenever you say an objective, you want to follow it by as measured by. Right? So win the Indy 500 as measured by, and then that's when your key results come into play. So let's just look at a few of these key results. So the first key result is increase average lap speed by 2%. So that's the how. How are we going to win the Indy 500? We're going to increase average lap speed by 2%. Now, if you think about this, it's not necessarily diving into the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day things that you're going to have to execute, but it's a very high level of what you have to accomplish and what you have to do to win the Indy 500 in this example. So remember that whenever you're creating your key results and your objective, it's not necessarily the specific day-to-day things that you're going to do every single day, but it's the high-level thing that you need to achieve to get you to the what of the equation. And actually, that brings us to this quote from Andy Grove himself. Now, I like this quote because it puts this into perspective. So I'm just going to read this. I know that it's not great when people read from their slides, but just bear with me. if my objective is to grow a beautiful rose bush, I know without asking that you also want me to keep the lawn green. I doubt I ever had a key result that said, walk around to stay on top of employees' morale. We wrote the things that needed special emphasis. And this segues perfectly into that example of the key result. Now, this objective is to grow a beautiful rose bush, but he's not talking about keeping the lawn green because he knows that that is just something that has to happen. So think about that whenever you're creating your objectives and key results. So now we're going to talk about why OKRs are important to us. And I know that I'm switching up the agenda a little bit here, but I think that it's important to go into these 4 superpowers that, again, Measure What Matters really does a great job of explaining. But superpower number 1 from OKRs is focus and commit to priorities. So this really helps us choose what matters most. And what I mean by that is whenever we have this framework in place, if you have an OKR, that is your focus. That is what you're trying to accomplish as a company, as a team, or as an individual. And what that does is it gives you the ability to say no to things that don't fall into your focus. And I'll tell you how that's important once we get into the how of OKRs. But the key here is that it allows you to focus, say yes to the things that you know you need to do, and to say no to the things that you know you shouldn't be doing. And then superpower number 2 is align and connect for teamwork. So there's different types of OKRs. I like to focus, and IMEO likes to focus on cascading OKRs, which means that it starts at the company level and then it goes all the way down to the individual contributor with everything connected. And as we move forward, so stay tuned, as we move forward, we'll go into more details on that. Superpower number 3. Track for accountability. Now, this is the important piece of the puzzle that goes back to measurable and time specific or time bound. So they're going to help us, OKRs that is, they're going to help us monitor progress and course correct. So in the company that I've implemented OKRs for, a publicly traded company, there's on track, off track, and progressing. Now, in the middle of the quarter, which we'll get to a little bit later as well, is a intra-quarterly scoring process that's what we labeled. And that's really where you go into your OKRs, and we use a people management tool, but you go into your OKRs and you establish, is this goal on track, off track, or progressing? And it's kind of like the red, yellow, green framework or the stoplight framework. If it's red, that tells us that we need to apply pressure, or we need to focus on what this is and how, and we got to figure out how to move the needle forward, right? Or the other good thing about OKRs is if you review that OKR and it's off track and you realize that this isn't necessarily a priority, then you mark that as not as a priority and you take that away from your focus, right? Then the last superpower is superpower number 4, stretch for amazing. OKRs empower us to achieve the seemingly impossible. If you haven't watched John Doerr's TED Talk, definitely watch that. It will give you a better understanding of this. But what that really means is OKRs are stretch goals. So if you achieve 70% of an OKR, that's actually a success. Now, if you achieve lower than 70%, it means that the challenge was a little bit too difficult. If you achieve 100%, then that means it was a little bit too easy. You want to take what you're trying to accomplish and think about what would happen if we went just a little further, right? I'll probably mess this up, but it's the shoot for the moon, you might fall on the stars, or shoot for the stars, you might fall on the moon. That's what OKRs are giving you the ability to do. And the important thing here is that OKRs are not performance metrics necessarily. So you don't punish an employee for not meeting OKRs, you help them learn, right? So at the end of each quarter, you're going to reflect on what happened here. And you're going to use that lesson learned to build your next OKRs for the next quarter. And that really creates psychological safety, which means that you can talk about mistakes. You can talk about things that might not really get fulfilled in this quarter. And you don't reap the repercussions. You don't see the consequences. You take it as a lesson learned. Okay, so the next piece of the puzzle is, how do they work? Because now we know what they are, we know why they are important. Let's go to how they work. Okay, so in IMEO's services, what we provide is, as I mentioned before, the cascading OKRs. So we start with the company OKRs, right? We take that as the baseline. This is what we're trying to accomplish as a company. So you might have objective number 1. We want to meet this amount of new logo bookings, or we want to have 10 speaking engagements, whatever it is that your company is going to be focused on. Then you have your key results underneath there. Okay, and that relates to everybody because they're company OKRs. That's where a vision can come into play. That's where you can motivate and really create that purpose for your employees. And then we take it to the next level. So we have the company objective, and then we have the company key results. We take those company key results and we turn those into the next level down. That becomes the executive level, the founder, whoever it is in your company, the next level down. That becomes your executives' objectives. So just to say it simply, company key results turn into executives' objectives. That's how you know that they're connected. That's where the cascading part comes down. And then you'll follow that all the way down to an individual contributor. So let's say that I'm the manager. I took a company key result, made that my objective. I created my own key results, and then my direct reports took my key results and made it into their objectives as well. So now when an individual looks at this, they can see how what they're doing affects what the manager produces. And then the manager can look and see what they're doing affects the company. It creates that purpose that people look for so desperately, especially in these times in today. So let's look at it a little bit differently with a visual, because I know that some people are more visual learners. I'm probably in that category as well. So we look at our company OKRs. This is where we started, right? And then from there, we go into the ELT, and then the direct reports, and then the managers, and then the individuals. But you can see how they're all connected. And what's important about this, whenever you're explaining this to individuals at the company, is that the individual is just as connected to the results of the company OKRs as the ELT or the executive leadership team is to establishing that company's OKR, whether they make it or not, right? So everybody's responsibilities is just as important than the other. Really, this should be a flat org chart, but just for the visualization and to really see the impact here, I wanted to make it like this. Now, another way to explain this, and this just continues on, explaining it in different ways that people can understand, because I know that sometimes this can be the tricky part, right? But if we look at a football team example, now I'm in the Americas. When I say football, I'm talking about like National Football League. And I know that not everybody is going to see this, but I don't think that you have to understand sports fully to get what I'm trying to get here. So stick with me. But if you have any questions or if you want a different example, drop something in the comments and I can definitely reach back out to you personally. So if we look at the head coach, the objective of the head coach is to win the Super Bowl, right? That's the what. No more, no less. We're trying to win the Super Bowl. So then the key results, they're going to be how we are going to win the Super Bowl. So we're going to passing attack of masses, 300 plus yards, defense, fewer than 17 points per game. Special teams unit ranks in the top 3 in punt returns. Okay, now if we focus in on these key results, as I mentioned before, these key results are then going to be that manager's objectives. And we can see right here, the first one, passing attack amasses 300 plus yards. Well, that turns into generate 300 yards per game passing attack, right? And then they create their own key results that follow, which then the players would take this, achieve 65% pass completion. That's probably going to be the quarterback. Cut interceptions to fewer than 1 per game. That's going to be the quarterback. That's going to be the offensive line. That's going to be the wide receivers, right? Hire new quarterbacks coach. So that's going to be more on the offensive coach, right? But they can break these down into individual contributor OKRs. So I think that this does a really good explanation of how OKRs can work, create the alignment, and create the cascading effect that we at IMEO like to produce for companies. So now let's go to the next slide. How do we manage OKRs? Some of these I've already mentioned, and I'll go ahead and break them down into more detail. So whenever we're talking about managing OKRs, if you just create OKRs and you never track them, then you're missing a huge opportunity, right? So don't fall into that category. So we start with obviously building out the OKRs. We make sure that they're reviewed, they're approved. Okay, now we start working towards that goal. But if you never track them, how do you know if you're making progress? That's where intra-quarterly scoring goes into play. So every single month, we're going to go into, this says Lattice because that's what we use, or that's what we've used in the past with other clients. There's other ways that you can track this. You can use a spreadsheet, which if you reach out to us, we can definitely provide a spreadsheet that we've used in the past. But what we're looking at is you're going to go in there. You're going to say, are these OKRs off track, progressing, or on track? And we kind of touched upon that. But then the next part of managing this is not just letting them sit there. If they're off track, as a manager, you want to bring these up in your one-on-ones, in your team meetings, especially if it's an OKR that's kind of across your team. In a sales program, you might be looking at building or trying to find new clients, 10 new clients, and that spreads across 5 reps, whatever the case is. Well, that might be something that you want to bring up into a team meeting and talk about that. Hey, guys, girls, I've seen that our OKR is off track for meeting these 10 new clients. What's happening there? Who's seeing success? Who's struggling? What's the biggest bottleneck? This is how you create alignment, because once you have that in your organization and you have those meetings, that's how you can be transparent and really move forward. In fact, there's a quote that I like saying that the best teams make the most mistakes. And what I mean by that is that they're very candid, they're very transparent, they're bringing these things up in meetings, they're talking about it individually, they're talking about it in one-on-ones, and they're not afraid to take that risk of mentioning that mistake, because the earlier that you mention a mistake, the easier and faster you can course correct, right? So that's where the psychologically safe environment is so important here. Now, the next piece of the puzzle is quarterly scoring. So this is going to go down to the end of the quarter. So whenever you're scoring the end of the quarter, this is the finalization of the OKR. Did you meet it? Off track, progressing, or on track? If you didn't meet it, then provide a description. And honestly, it might be a good idea to have a full-on company meeting where you can discuss the OKRs that you didn't meet and how those lessons learned are going to help you improve your OKR for next quarter. And then the ones that you did meet, celebrate, right? I went to Jack Welch Management Institute for my MBA, my executive MBA. And one of the main things that you want to do for your team, remote, hybrid, on-prem, whatever the case is, you want to celebrate their achievements, right? They've worked hard to accomplish this. Celebrate them. That's going to improve engagement. That's going to improve the satisfaction of the employee. They're going to stay there longer. There's so many benefits there that we can get into it in a different video. Okay, so that's how we do that. And then we use that to really build off into the next quarter and really progress. So in summary, right, OKRs align the company's priority all the way to each individual. This is so important because it connects purpose and meaningfulness to your employees. When employees feel like what they do matters, they stay at the company longer. They miss less days, so absenteeism is lower. And there's so many benefits that I mentioned before. I'll go into another video so we don't make this one so long. But we're able to focus and commit to what matters. That's the key with OKRs, right? Focus and alignment is so important. And how you execute that is so important. If we look at the image here, we can see that if we put the sand in first and then the rocks and then the boulders, I know that's not boulders, but I can't think of the word right now. But if we do it that way, then we don't have room to really progress in the right way. But if we put the big stones in there first, then the smaller ones, and then the sand, it forms around, right? So this is really a metaphor for focusing. If we focus on what matters most, then we can go into the minier things, right? The things that are a little bit smaller, and then we can tackle the grand things. So I hope that you enjoyed this presentation on OKRs. And if you have any questions on how to implement this into your organization, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. You can find us at imeocompany.com. That's our website. You can find us at zwright, ZWRIGHT, at imeoconsulting.com, or at Zach A. Wright on Instagram. That's where we have our IMEO Company page, and then IMEO Company on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. But if you like this and you want that OKR Excel sheet that I mentioned, just send or add a comment below or send us an email. But thank you so much for watching. Subscribe and like, so then that way you can see the other videos that we're planning on putting out there as well. But like I said, thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.